from Kitty Hawk from North Carolina to California. There was one in 2012 from New York to California, and I saw the send-off from that and got interested in antique motorcycles. So without even having restored the 1927 motorcycle, we entered the event. I had never ridden an antique motorcycle, I had never assembled one or worked on one, but we decided to jump right into the event. So I competed in that in 2014 in the Cannonball. We went from Daytona Beach, Florida to Tacoma, Washington. I made the whole trip on a 1927 Harley Davidson, and then thought that would be the end of it. But then there was another Cannonball announced for 2016. It was billed as the race of the century, and all the bikes, all the machines in that event will be 1916 and earlier, 100 years old. So I started assembling pieces for a 1915 Harley Davidson. Many people call this the first modern Harley Davidson. It's V-twin, twin cylinder, the first 3-speed transmission for Harley Davidson. It's a step start. It has bicycle pedals, and you use the bicycle pedals to start it. So I started assembling pieces for this in 2015, preparing for the 16 Cannonball. And we are going from Atlantic City, New Jersey to San Diego, California in 17 days. 8 days of riding, 1 day of rest in Dodge City, Kansas, and then 8 more days of riding. We'll do between 275 and 300 miles per day. It is an endurance event for antique motorcycles. More details, including the schedule, at www.motorcyclecannonball.com.
And that's an endurance event for the motorcycle and the rider.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Many of the entrants have a crew, so that when they come in at the end of the day, they can drop the motorcycle off and have it serviced. My entire crew consists of myself and my wife. My wife, Joan, is the crew chief. And so when I come in at the end of the day, I'll have 4 hours or more of servicing to do. I'll tighten everything, change the oil, check the tires, tighten everything that may have come loose, and lubricating and so forth. We built this bike. We started in January of this year, 2016. I started with a bent, pitted, rusty frame that had been out in the hedgerow for about 50 years. And I straightened the frame, I welded up all the pits and all the thin spots on it, straightened it out. The motor, I'm taking a different approach on the motor than many people are doing. This is a totally stock 1915 motor. It has original 1915 pistons, original 1915 cylinders, original 1915 camshaft, and valve lifters. It's entirely original, except for the carburetor, which is a few years later. The only other change that we've made to the bike is the saddle, which is about 1925 and up. It's an identical saddle to what I used on the 1927 machine, Daytona to Tacoma. And the wheels are a modern wheel. However, we still have no front brake, as the bike was originally equipped in 1915. So I taught myself how to lace and true the rims by watching YouTube. We assembled the motor, the transmission, all the mechanical work did right here in the garage. We did the paint, the pinstriping, nickel plating, everything. This has been a very challenging project. There are many times where I went to sleep at night, where I just had to sleep on a dead end that we had come to, and given it some more thought until we solved it the next day. Many technical problems. The bike does have some reproduction parts on it. The sheet metal is reproduction. The fenders and tanks are reproduction. The battery box was fabricated by my wife. I got some photocopies of original patterns. These boxes are available reproduction, but they're quite expensive. They're several $100s. So we made this one out of about $3 worth of metal. Joan laid out, my crew chief, Joan laid out the patterns, did all the cutting, folding, and bending, and then I soldered it together. The color is authentic. The pinstriping is authentic. All the graphics and the decals are authentic. I do have some original unrestored parts. This rigid fork is an original original paint, 1915 fork, including the pinstriping, and then I did this pinstriping by hand to match. The headlight stanchions are original, unrestored. The horn, the klaxon horn, is an original, unrestored horn from the teens. And the muffler, which is on loan from a friend of mine, the muffler is an original, unrestored 1915 Harley-Davidson muffler. And we have about 300 miles on the bike so far. We're 1 week away from the event, and it's running very well. I'm very pleased with it. It's a lively performer, very responsive. I was concerned that it might not track properly down the road because of the bent frame, but I did check it carefully when I straightened everything, and it's running very well. Very pleased with it.
So aligning the frame is very important.
It is. It starts easily. It's running well. We have the carburetor and the oil consumption dialed in. These early Harley-Davidsons had a total loss oil system, which means the oil that gets pumped into the engine eventually splashes out onto the primary chain. It goes out through this tube and lubricates the primary chain, and then eventually returns to the earth. So the amount of oil getting pumped into the engine has to match the amount that is lost, and we've got that dialed in very well. The handlebars are very distinctive. They're nickel plated and often called wheelbarrow handlebars because of the long reach. The right side is the throttle, and the left side controls the ignition timing. Retard the timing to start. If you give it an additional turn, it disables one of the exhaust valves, so you have decompression, so you can get the bike cranked to start, and then open it up for compression. It's a 3-speed transmission, foot clutch, hand clutch that work together. Foot clutch and hand clutch, first, neutral, second, and third, 3-speed. This right side is the fuel tank. Holds 2 gallons. The reserve tank is a ½ gallon, is on the left side, and then from here forward is the oil tank, a remote sump for refilling the crankcase as needed.
A little story on the nickel plating, not to interrupt, but I was over here the day that you and Joan were nickel plating, noticing what a delicate process that was. Can you explain just a little bit about that? Steve did all the nickel plating himself by hand with his wife on this machine, and it was quite pleasurable to watch them go through the process over here. And I know the rest of the machine must have taken just as much delicacy as that did.
We used a plating system called electroless, not electroplating, but electroless nickel plating. And it's a thermal transfer. You bring the nickel bath up to about 180 degrees, and you submerge the clean parts into the nickel and leave it in for an hour. Get about 1 mil or 1/1000th of an inch nickel plating for every hour that you leave it in. And but there's a lot of math involved because you can't have more surface area to plate than nickel that you have in the solution. So my crew chief took care of all the math, calculating the surface area and how much nickel.
So it's good to have a knowledge of ratio, right?
It is. It is.
Figuring ratios.
We also have since the fuel tanks are so small, and many of the competitors in this event are using modified tanks, they're using expanded tanks that hold, some people call them traveling tanks, that hold 5 gallons or more. We stuck with the original style tanks because I just think it improves the lines and the look and the design of the original machine. So we have an accessory or auxiliary fuel tank, and this is an item that many people are using. It's called Rotopax. It's designed for motorcycles. It's an auxiliary tank of 1 gallon, which should get us about 30 miles or more, 35 miles. But rather than have that glaring red tank right there, Joan made a nice cover for it that you saw earlier, kind of a period style khaki cover.
So we have a balance between aesthetics and function.
Very much
on
so.
A motorcycle.
Very much so.
Especially when you're rebuilding an antique motorcycle.
So 1 week to go to the event. www.motorcyclecannonball.com. Also, I documented the entire build since January on my Facebook page. go to Facebook, type in Steve DeCosa, 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 and my photos are there for you to view. Thanks for your interest. We're looking for a safe ride. Our major concern, 300 miles each day, is to have a safe ride and to make it to our destination each night. Schedule for the event, the stops and schedule are at motorcyclecannonball.com. Thanks very much.
Can you crank it up once for us, or is it in that state right now?
I've got a couple things apart.
Okay. I'll come back to you on that.
We'll have to come back.
I'm going to challenge you with just one little side story of an obstacle that was of particular difficulty that you overcame in the process. Can you think of just one that really you had to scratch your head over?
I'll show you on the left side. When you retard the spark,
Right.
when you retard the spark, it moves the lever on this magneto. This has magneto ignition. There's no battery, no switches. It's like a lawnmower. You just crank it and go. This lever, this rod rather, that goes from here in, loops around under here, comes back, and then through this bracket, this bell crank, and then goes down to the magneto.
Yeah, I can see them moving.
This is called the intermediate control rod. It's available reproduction, but the manufacturer was out of it. He didn't have any left. So I made this out of 3/16 inch stainless steel. And it looks simple, but it has to be totally correct in order for everything to work. And also the bracket that mounts it all was missing. So I had to make the bracket, and I had to make the intermediate control rod, and then have everything exactly right. And that took a couple of days to get all that right. That was an example there. Just a lot of things. I have a lot of work just in this clutch pedal. This part was gone from here forward, so I welded up an extension on it and ground it and shaped it to